Yes, we're live.
All right, great. Good morning. It is now 10 o'clock a.m. and I will call the Sewage and Water Board Strategic Planning Committee meeting to order. Special counsel, please call the roll.
Director Anthrop,
Here?
Director Scruggs, Director Cole, Director Thomas.
Here.
Director Stewart. Chair, you do not have a quorum, but you may proceed with the presentation item.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for joining us here today. I'm looking forward to this presentation. We have on the line Keith Redling, and it sounds like Nora from Raftellus Financial Consultants. They're going to give us an update on the stormwater and right-of-way fee development proposal. Turn it over to them.
Thank you, Director Anthrop. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, Keith Redling, Executive Vice President with Raftellus. And I'm going to make a presentation of our kind of an updated status report on the transportation fee and drainage fee work. Nora McKinley is going to work with me. And so we're looking forward to this as well. And if y'all can fire up the PowerPoint, I will operate from that slideshow.
Tyler's on a separate computer. Let me see. Here, right, with him. Plus Keith, I guess.
I think they have to
Oh, okay.
sort of put them together. Is it possible to just give them screen sharing and then they can just share the slides?
If he has it on his computer, or we can do it from here. Because I'm sharing my screen with the Teams meeting.
Oh, okay. So then they can see it.
Yes.
Okay,
I can see this meeting agenda on the screen.
there we go. So you
Now I
s-
can see the
Okay.
PowerPoint.
All right.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. So we're going to give you an update on our work. Next slide. Our agenda here is we're going to talk about the street or transportation fee a little bit first because that's kind of the newer thing we've been working on. That effort is being funded through a contract amendment that was passed by this board about 6 weeks ago now, I think. We'll talk about our data sources for that fee, the data processing and analysis that we've done so far, and some next steps. And then we'll flip to a stormwater update and leave enough time for some Q&A. So on the next slide, a transportation fee typically is either a flat charge per parcel or a variable charge per parcel based on some sense of how much vehicular traffic that parcel is generating within the city. So we're able to look at all of the parcel information that we have across the city that we gathered for the stormwater fee study that's been ongoing. But in order to come up with a different way and perhaps a more precise way to allocate transportation costs between all the parcels, we've been looking at vehicular traffic. And so we have tabular data from the tax assessor for all the parcels in the city. It's about 150,000 parcels. And we also have a layer of information that was developed by FEMA for Orleans Parish that includes building footprints and building heights for all the buildings in the city. And what we intend to do and are well on our way to doing is marrying that information about buildings with information from the Institute for Transportation Engineering, where data has been developed from numerous traffic studies over numerous years to correlate how much vehicular trips are generated by different land uses based on how big the building is that land use. And you can see here in the exhibit, single-family detached housing in the ITE Transportation Engineering database is expected on average to generate 9.09 vehicle trips per 24 hours. So the idea here is that the cost allocation for transportation funding could be based on the trips generated by each property. And this Institute for Transportation Engineering publishes and routinely updates information about these vehicle trips. So we've got that data. We've been working with it. Next slide. And let's see, there we go. Okay. So in terms of the data processing, we've been using the information in the ITE manual for trip factors and tying those to each of the land uses that the Orleans Parish assessors use to identify and manage information about land use. So the idea here is if you owned a home on a lot, we know that on average, that home on the lot generates about 9 vehicle trips per 24 hours. If you owned a fast food restaurant with a drive-through, the building might not be that big, but a lot of traffic is generated by that kind of land use. Well, we know which land uses are fast food with a drive-through or gas station or office building or restaurant, etc. So connecting all those land use codes to these trip factors and also processing that FEMA developed layer that has building footprints and story heights such that ultimately we're able to estimate a number of vehicle trips that would go with each parcel within the city of New Orleans as a mechanism by which we could allocate transportation cost. And this last sub-bullet here is worth noting. No data source is perfect. And this FEMA data source is just like every other one. It's imperfect. And we have about 14,000 records in that database that don't have building height. So we're using some mechanisms to get past that data limitation. So that's the story on that. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see kind of a physical, well, here you'll see some of the challenges are that buildings and parcels are not the same thing. And we have buildings in the city that spread out across and cover over multiple parcels. You can see that on the left. Parcel lines in red, building edges in the bright green or the bright kind of magenta color. And so that allocation is being done within a geographic information system that we manage. And then if you go to the next slide, you'll see kind of a little bit more of a specific example where we have this single family home on a lot on the left-hand side here. And that Institute for Transportation Engineers says on average about 9 vehicle trips per 24 hours would be generated by that land use. If you look at this one on the right, it's a pharmacy. It's got a big parking lot. The building is the purple part on the property. And we know based on the building size and the land use of pharmacy, the Institute for Transportation Engineering says that property would generate about 970 trips per 24 hours. So that's 107 times what you get from one single family home on a lot, the one on the left. So in our stipulation of rates for a transportation fee, normally what we would do is say this pharmacy should pay about 107 times what a home pays. But there's more to it than that because we have to take into account what they pay in millages already. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see the data processing analysis. We've been sampling properties by land use to assign reasonable trip factors because the land use codes in the Institute for Transportation Engineering and the land use codes maintained by the Orleans Parish assessors are not always perfectly aligned. So we've adjusted some factors where we needed to. We've also gone ahead and calculated what each property in the city pays now toward street maintenance. And that's based on the fact that an analysis was done by city folks that 3.18 mils of current millages paid by everyone are allocable to street maintenance. So each property that pays any taxes now is paying about 3.18 mils. And since we know their assessed value, we know what they're paying. Nora, why don't you take that next bullet? Let me see if I can quiet things down around me a little bit.
All right, no problem. So the last bullet here is just talking about how we computed trips per parcel using the total building area and the single family detached trip LUC per dwelling unit is the base, like we saw on the previous slide. And other trip LUCs are scaled compared to that base single family amount.
Okay, thank you. And let's go ahead and hop to the next slide. So in terms of next steps, we have gone through and reviewed preliminary results from all this work we've done, which is kind of a massive data manipulation, given that you've got 150,000 parcels. We've identified some cases where we know the data needs some work. One thing I remember was a big gas station that was a racetrack, and the whole roof print of the roof area above all the gas pumps was counted in the FEMA database as building area, and the land use code came across as a drive-through fast food. And that estimated their vehicle trips too high. So we have to do some cleanup like that. That's the third bullet and the fourth bullet. And then we will finish identifying some remaining data gaps. We'll recalculate some draft results. And we imagine a rate structure here that works like we've described the stormwater, which is you calculate how much you would want to charge a property based on their trips. Then look at what they're already paying through millages. And they pay 3.18 mils toward transportation. So if they're already paying that amount through millages, don't charge them anymore. If they're paying less than that amount through millages, just charge them the extra. So that's the idea. And we'll be modeling different rates in the same rate modeling kind of ecosystem that we developed for stormwater, as well as how a fee like this might be phased in over time, because it's going to need to be gradually phased in, not all at one whack. And to also look at caps on how fast bills can go up and just to look after everybody so that as it's implemented, the increases in costs for those who pay more are tolerable. So that's our next steps. Now I'm going to switch over to give you an update on the stormwater side. So
Keith,
on
can
the
we pause for
stormwater-
a second
Yes,
for
yes,
questions on the
please.
transportation
Yeah.
side of things?
Yes.
I had two to start, and then I think you probably have some
Yes.
questions too, right? Okay. I guess, well, first, maybe if you could give a little bit more high-level overview in terms of So, I'm understanding that we're using these trip coefficient numbers to sort of generate a rate by which you would charge folks for maintenance of streets. But I think if you could give a little bit more plain language sort of connection between what it is we're talking about doing here, and then I have a couple of more specific questions.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, and I probably didn't spend enough time on it. So the idea here is that the city needs more money for street maintenance, which would include curb line maintenance that helps with drainage as well, street surface, and pothole repair, et cetera. And so there are a lot of ways that can be paid for that are perfectly fine, and one of them is through millages, and that's how it's being paid for now. But the revenue generated by the 3.18 mills is not nearly enough to maintain the streets in good working order. So the theory here is we need more money for street maintenance, and we're looking at different ways to get it. And the way that we're focused on here is to allocate that additional cost across the properties based on the vehicular traffic they each generate. So the idea is that the benefit a property receives from well-maintained streets correlates to how much traffic that property is creating. So if you're a property that creates a lot of vehicle trips, you're a big user of the streets, so to speak, and it would be appropriate for you to pay more for good streets than someone who doesn't generate many trips. So that's the rational nexus between trip generation and the rate. The second thing that I'll say about it is that if you came to believe that you needed, for example, $10 million more for street maintenance, then we can establish a rate that will generate $10 million more, and we can then look at phasing in that rate over some number of years with a phase in and caps and protections so that no individual ratepayer is overly harmed by the new approach. So I'm hoping that got the first part of your question, Tyler.
Yeah, I think you got us a little closer. Essentially, you're saying that it's sort of similar to historically, and I use the word historically importantly there, that there was a sort of connection between gas taxes and using of streets that, like, the more gas you buy, the more you're driving, the more you're using the roads. And so that money goes towards, maintaining the roads. I say historically because obviously gas taxes, I think, haven't really kept up with that over time. But so the idea is here, if, this sort of generally accepted engineering manual says, if you have this type of property, you're generally generating this many car trips on the streets surrounding your property. And so therefore, this is your share of the overall pie of money that's needed to maintain those streets going forward. And so 2 quick questions more specifically on that. One of the things you said towards the end was talking about offsetting the millages, that, if you are paying under the current millage less than what your sort of assessed share of that street maintenance cost is, that you would receive a credit on your bill for that amount. What if you're paying more now under the millage than the trips that you generate? Do you get a fee? Do you get a refund?
No. Under the way that we're and I'm not saying that you couldn't hypothetically decide to do that, but it's a separate decision how millages are assessed, and there's not a mechanism to reduce someone's tax bill because of something else they're doing, like there is to reduce their fee based on the taxes they pay. So the way we're modeling it right now is, if you pay more in millages toward streets than your fair share based on these trips, you're not going to be charged anything for the trips, but you're still going to pay the millages that you're paying now. And that's true on the stormwater side as well.
Right. And in your experience in other places that have implemented similar fee structures, is there any kind of allowance for folks who don't have cars?
No, there's normally not. And one of the things I'll say, and I don't want to sound wishy-washy, and I'm not a wishy-washy guy. There is no perfect way to do this.
Yeah.
So if you think about how you capture money for water and wastewater based on a base rate and meter reads for consumption, those things don't take into account some of the things that do create differences in how much someone is costing you to serve. And similarly here, when you think about, for example, the ITE data says that an average home on a lot generates 9 trips per 24 hours. And by the way, if you pull out of your driveway and go down to the grocery store and then come home, that's 2 trips in here.
Right.
So you left and you came back. So 9 might sound high, but it's really 4.5 round trips. That we all know there are houses with 3 teenagers in there that generate 30 trips a day. And there are houses like the one I live in with 2 gray-haired people in them that never touch 9 trips a day. So it's an inexact science, but it's generally viewed as better than the alternative. And therefore, when you think about the specific question, could you give somebody a discount if they didn't have a car? I think you could. You just have to decide how you'll get that data and keep that data current and check on whether that data is accurate or not. And then it can be incorporated into the rate structure. But it's a careful decision whether the juice is worth the squeeze on making it more complicated to make it more fair. I think that's the decision to be made. And we're all in to help y'all decide, but it's a decision we didn't preordain.
Thanks. Director Thomas.
Yes, I wanted to know, would this possibly negatively impact low-income communities? A lot of times, single-family homes that are near bus lines or near large buildings, like you had the pharmacy, I think, within walking distance, would that not put an extra burden on them versus those homes that are in gated communities that may not use those types of resources except kind of going out or what have you? Would this not have an impact on the lower income communities to shelter a lot of that cost?
I think that it's a thing to be very carefully considered. And I would say that on average, the number of vehicle trips generated by a residential property does correlate to affluence. And so there are things that we can do for that, some of which are related to helping those who need help through an affordability program. Others of those are more naturally buried in the rate structure. So when you think about calculating how much revenue you'd like to generate, new money for street maintenance, and what to charge a residential property, then subtract from that what they're already paying in millages. An average residential property at 3.18 mills is already paying $80 a year toward transportation. Well, that may turn out to be higher than the rate we choose, so that the majority of the residential properties wouldn't have to pay any more than they do now because their fee would be lower than what they're already paying on the 3.18 mills. Then for the ones for whom that's not true, if they have an affordability program, we would always recommend incorporating an affordability program into this kind of rate structure to help those who need additional help. On the mechanism of trying to calculate how they generate fewer trips, I see that as more difficult than helping those who need help and setting the rate at a reasonable enough amount that for most residentials, their bills don't change from now.
Okay, I want to make sure that we're not saying we're going to put this burden on lower income communities to hold on to because they are in closer proximity to bus lines and other things that have traffic versus a gated community that does not have that going through it. That's a tough sell to me, I think. But I do think that it needs to be considered when presenting. So. Thank you.
I appreciate that feedback. And the one other thing I'll offer is the tax exempts are the ones for whom this would generate the most revenue from because they don't pay any millages now. So in terms of this kind of development of a rate structure and fee, the folks who haven't been paying anything are the ones who don't pay any taxes. And a lot of the allocation would go to them, which is not necessarily good or bad. It's just the truth where we're layering a fee on top of a tax.
Thank you.
I'm comfortable moving on to the stormwater fee if you are.
Yes.
I know you've got some noise there, Keith.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just in and out. I hope it's tolerable for
It's
y'all.
not that bad, I don't think. We can still hear you
Um,
fine.
Okay, good. Well, let's do next slide here on the stormwater update. We've been working on the stormwater fee off and on for a long time. The goal of this rate structure is to get each property to contribute as they should. And we feel like the rate structure based on millages and impervious area makes a lot of sense in New Orleans because some of the benefit that properties receive from your services relate to your managing the runoff and pumping water, whether it's their runoff that you're removing from their land or whether it's the runoff of others that you're keeping from flooding yet another group of people. So we have a financial planning and rate model developed with a number of input variables. We've refined a number of assumptions for the model now. We've incorporated measured impervious area into the database for each property. And we're about to roll in this transportation and street fee also so that as we model the impact of these fees on ratepayers, how an affordability program could work, how a cap could work, how a phase-in could work, how a credit program could work, that we're looking at the whole picture at one time, which is what people are paying in millages, what we want from them for a drainage fee, and what we want from them for a street fee, all three at once. And I guess I'll just say there's 150,502 parcels in the city. We looked at every one of them one at a time, a human being, and measured the impervious area on each one. And I wrote down a couple of stats this morning. There's 136,137 of those that have impervious things on them. And we used 2025 near map imagery, which has 3-inch pixels, which is a very high resolution aerial photo. And we measured more than 683 million square feet of impervious area across those 136,000 parcels. It's 232,000 equivalent residential units of impervious area, and it's set up to be maintained over time as new imagery is developed and as things are built, torn down, annexed, subdivided, recombined, etc. So lots of work being done on this database. Next slide. The fee would be based on impervious area. It would be offset by drainage millages paid for those who pay. And there are 14.26 mills applicable to drainage. We have not assumed a millage roll forward in our financial planning. And we've set up a revenue requirement to net about $50 million new dollars at full phase in. We modeled it so that every property would participate in this drainage fee unless they don't have any impervious area. And our approach to that is based on our experience that the legal precedents and the technical understanding for a drainage fee is that the fee is for a service provided and it would need to be assessed to all the properties served, much like water, sewer, electricity, natural gas. Our rate structure includes 3 flat-rated residential tiers. It incorporates homestead exemptions that ratepayers get now for owner-occupied. It includes a phase-in, customer assistance program, credits, and individual phase-ins are possible under our technical approach. And the majority of the additional revenue would come from tax exempt properties, at least particularly during the first few years of the phase-in, because those are the ones not paying any millages now. Next slide. So there are a whole lot of caveats anytime people are doing data analysis like this, and I'm not going to try to cover every one of them, but we're using data sources, parcels, assessor data, land use, aerial photography. All of that stuff is current, but none of it is from the exact same moment in time. So for example, the aerial photography that we used is from mid-2025, which is very new for aerial photography, but things change on the ground every day. So this data all evolves, and the evolution of the data will be taken into account in a data maintenance program once a fee is in place, just like your meter reading program has to continuously refresh water meter data. We've made a lot of assumptions about collection rates and participation rates in different programs. The revenue requirements might evolve. And if a policy decision was made that some properties wouldn't be charged for the fee, then the rates would need to change. So just a quick review on the rate structure. We would count, the rate would be applied. A calculated gross fee would be come up with based on impervious area. Subtracted from that would be what a property pays now, and that's on 14.26 mils. No property would pay less than now. So that's an answer to Tyler's question from earlier, and that is to say, we're not proposing to cut anyone's taxes, even if this fee calculation suggests they're paying more in taxes than their fair share now. They would continue to. We have 3 flat rates proposed for residential. For smaller homes on with smaller amounts of impervious area, a low tier rate that is 60% of a typical home's bill. And the smallest 20% of the residentials would get that rate. A middle rate for most, 60% of the residentials, which is over 60,000. I think there are 107,000 residential properties in our billing file. We get billed for 1 unit of impervious area, which is 2,906 square feet of impervious. And then the largest 20% by impervious area, not how big your house is, but how big your impervious surface area is, will be charged the tier 3 rate, which is 1.6 ERUs. The next slide shows the data we used to develop that. This is a frequency histogram of every residential property in the city. We measured the impervious area on every one of them, and you get this beautiful skewed bell curve, which is what you expect. And you can see here, we drew boundaries for the tier 1, the ones paying 0.6 ERUs, tier 2 paying 1 ERU, tier 3 paying 1.6. The median impervious area is 2,906. So on the next slide, let's talk about the phase-in for a minute. We're gonna need a phase-in. Your revenue requirements are $50 million new dollars, maybe more. You can't go from where you are to getting $50 million new dollars in one jump. It's too big. So we know that we need a phase-in. We have built this database to model different scenarios, and we were modeling 5-year phase-ins, and then most recently we modeled 2 different 10-year phase-in periods where the phase-in is more gradual because it takes much longer to get to the full $50 million revenue requirement. Okay, let's go next. The phase-in would ease the transition for every ratepayer by keeping the rates low at first. And we also have modeled into this individual phase-in caps, and that is to say that not only would we have a rate that gradually goes up over time, But for any individual ratepayer whose bill goes up too much in any one year, we could cap that. And that would give us more gradualism for the most highly impacted customers, whether they're residential or non-residential. So just a few inputs in the model on the next slide. Millage now, 1426. Our proposal is to keep it right there at 1426. We'd have annual rates per equivalent residential unit. At year X is full phase-in. We modeled a few 5-year phase-ins where the rate goes bop, 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 and 5 years in, you're getting $50 million new dollars. We got a fair amount of internal feedback that still seemed a little bit blunt, so we've started modeling 10-year phase-in. I told you about the ERU and the tier break points already, but the bottom line is most residential properties have between 2135 and 3975 square feet of impervious area. 60% of all the residentials fall in that range, and they would all be billed one flat rate. The tier 1s and the tier 3s less and more. So next slide shows a couple of examples. On the left, a big house, 4,915 square feet of impervious area. That is enough impervious area to be high tier. So they'd be charged for 1.6 ERUs. In the middle, 3,214 square feet of impervious area. That is solidly middle tier, billed for 1 ERU. It's owner occupied, they're getting a homestead exemption, and they would continue to get the homestead exemption under this rate proposal. So they would continue to benefit in the same way. The middle property here, a smaller home, it's small enough that it would get the low rate of 0.6 ERUs. Next over is a pharmacy. It's got, you can see the measured impervious area in kind of the see-through blue color on top of the photography. It's 53,753 square feet of impervious area. That's exactly 18.4 times what is found on a typical residential lot in New Orleans. So they would be charged 18.4 times the rate. Less whatever they're paying in millages now. And this is a business, might be paying a lot in millages the first few years of this phase-in. Their stormwater bill could be less than their millages, so no increase at first. Same for the residentials. And then our last example, a church, 68,000 and change square feet of impervious area. That's 23.5 ERUs. They would be charged a rate minus what they pay in millages. They don't pay anything in millages because they're tax exempt. If that rate times their ERUs was a hardship, they could benefit from the gradual individualized phase-in caps that we described. The mechanisms for how that works are well understood, and we've helped develop those phase-in caps in other places, but we haven't proposed a specific metric for that at this point. We're just getting set up to model it different ways for y'all and help everybody gel up on their preferred way to go about it. I'm almost done. I know this is taking forever. The stormwater fee structure on the next slide. We also are including a credits program. We factored in a 5% revenue loss from credits. The idea here is that properties where they're doing something to help with their runoff should pay less. Whether it is them participating in a stream cleanup program or an education program, or they've put a rain garden in their yard, or they're helping clean curb inlets in a neighborhood, that we can come up with ways to charge them less for drainage because of what they're doing to help. The credits would apply to their fee. It would not apply to their millages. Millages are different and separate, and they're going to be what they're going to be. But when we calculate their fee, if they've got a rain garden on their land and they're helping manage runoff, we drop their fee down. That's the credits program. So all of that is incorporated into our model, and I'll put you on next steps, last slide. All our impervious areas measured, it's ready, it's in this database, it's ready to be used by policymakers to imagine different scenarios, model out how those scenarios actually would apply to every property, not just a few examples. At the right time, that model can be used to help the public with understanding how the fee would apply to them. Both fees are going to be in there, a transportation fee and a drainage fee, so that anyone, and particularly policymakers here in the near term, as a rate proposal is developed for the people, can look at properties and look at how their final contribution toward these services would be based on their drainage characteristics, their traffic generating characteristics, their millages paid toward stormwater, their millages paid toward streets, and the funding policy choices made by the policymakers. So we've really got this thing kind of in a position to do great things with it mathematically pretty fast, model scenarios, and help our policymakers make their best choices here with kind of a combo of two different fees with millages. And that's it.
Well, I think, Keith, as you know, you and I have been working on this for probably about a decade. So I think to see it get to this point is really encouraging. I think we're probably the closest we've ever been to finally achieving our goal of having a steady, equitable source of revenue for our drainage system. And so I thank you for your work. I did have a question on one of the things you said fairly early on, where you said properties with no impervious surface will not pay at all. And I wanted to ask about that because obviously, you know, if you put on your engineer hat for a minute, if you're doing a rational method calculation, you know, your runoff coefficient for a grassy area is not 0. It's probably closer to 0.3. And so those properties are still generating runoff. And so is there any allowance for that? And then, sorry, one more thing I want to add to that is, in light of the specific unique condition of New Orleans, in that there are portions of the city that are below sea level and rely on constant duty pumping in order to remain dry on a sunny day, you know, those, I would think that there needs to be some accounting for that as well as the burden on maintaining that system.
Well, both of those are really good questions, and I'm not surprised. But here's what I think about it. I have worked on drainage fees where we do charge something for undeveloped property. So first off, undeveloped property in New Orleans that is tax paying is paying something already through the millages they pay. So the most common scenario we work on with drainage fees is not the combo of tax and fee, it's just fee. And so you've partially achieved the goal of getting undeveloped land to pay something because of the millages, as long as they're payers. The second argument is a little bit more esoteric, and we are not against a rate structure that would charge something for undeveloped land, but a lot of drainage fees take the position of, if all the land was undeveloped, it still generates runoff, but it would use God-given drainage systems, not man-built drainage systems. So when you look at land where nobody's built anything yet, the ditches and the creeks and the rivulets and the vegetation, those are the drainage system, and they handle everything okay. It's once the man-made stuff starts getting built that you need all the infrastructure. So we would happily model a rate structure that had some charge for undeveloped land as well. I don't think it would change things that much in your rate structure. And one of the things we're trying to do is keep it as simple as we can, which is hard as hell, pardon my French, because we need a lot of money here, $50 million new dollars or more. So that's how we came to the rate structure based on impervious area and an admission that it's not the only way to go.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just think, you know, your point is well taken that, you know, if the land were undeveloped, it would take, you know, God's intended path of runoff of that 30% or whatever that's going to run off. I think the challenge here, right, is that us men have built levees around our land. And so there is no longer any God-given path for that water to go except to the areas of the city that are below sea level that have to be pumped.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they would be lakes. So I'm not suggesting that you change the model, but I just want it to be on the record that I think that that there are some unique, specific concerns here that that need to be taken into account, at least, you know, sort of from a planning perspective, at least.
Well, and you know, Philadelphia, I helped set up the drainage fee in Philadelphia many years ago. It's a good example of one that charges a charge for undeveloped land. And I will say, you know, that was thoughtfully chosen at the time, but as the billing database was developed, which I worked on, you know, who owns most of the undeveloped land in Philadelphia is the city of Philadelphia.
Right.
And so their own bill for their own property was quite a bit higher than it otherwise would have been because of that allocation to undeveloped land. So then they exempted some undeveloped land owned by the city, which probably was an appropriate mechanism, but it did make it more complicated.
Yeah.
The other thing you asked about is a good one too, and that is you've got all this property in the city. Some of it's on high ground, some of it's below sea level. The ones below sea level benefit a lot more from pumping. And my mentor many, many years ago, when I was young enough to have a mentor, said, he had a lot of funny things that he said, but one of the things he said was, if you're on high ground, we have to carry your water to low ground. And if you're on low ground, we have to protect you from the guy's water from high ground. So everybody's using the system in different ways. Just because you're on high ground doesn't mean you're not using it. You're using it for us to carry your water safely around the guy on low ground. The low ground guy, he's being protected by your pumping. But philosophically, if you think about, go back to your water and wastewater rates. The people who live right beside the water plant cost a lot less money to serve than the ones at the very end of the line, 3 pumps downstream from the plant. But you don't charge them a penny different. And the general idea is that they didn't take into account those variables when they chose to be where they are. And so the idea that you would charge somebody more money for being in a low spot is hard to swallow for a lot of places, and we generally stay away from rate structures that try to do that.
Yeah, I really appreciate your candor on that because I think it is important to understand. And I'm certainly not suggesting that we would charge people on lower ground more. I'm really just sort of, you know, thinking about, you know, what does it mean, for instance, to charge a undeveloped piece of land that's below sea level, that's owned by a nonprofit, nothing, when if not for the drainage system, that property would likely be underwater. You know, what benefit does the nonprofit owner of that property derive from a system that they are not paying into? And so, yeah, I think great comments. That's all I have on this portion. Director Thomas, do you have any questions?
I did. Was there any pushback that you received in Philadelphia? Particularly, we have a lot of abandoned buildings and things like that. How do you present rates like that for these dilapidated properties that are kind of in limbo but are still benefiting from the system? What are your proposals for those situations? Is that something that gets carried on the taxes for the property for the next owner, or how does that kind of work? How are you all proposing?
That's a really, really good question. So, and it kind of cuts to the heart of some of this, which is treating drainage as a utility makes a lot of sense. And we're talking about all the ways it is like a utility. But one of the ways it's not very much like other utilities is it's a lot harder for a ratepayer to say, shut off my service. And so, you know, we helped the city of Pittsburgh, or Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority actually, do a drainage fee about 6 years ago. And one of the properties there was a Home Depot that had been closed, and a job training program had rented the property to teach people to run forklifts. So they weren't using much of the parking lot. They weren't even using all of the building. They rented the thing, but they became the utility customer for stormwater. And their bill was really high because they had all this parking lot and all this building. But their wallet was really light because it was a job training program, not a Home Depot. And it's an unfortunate reality that if we're going to charge people for impervious area, some of the impervious area is owned by properties that are struggling financially or worse. And if they are already abandoned, their impervious area is still there, then this process will generate a bill for them and they're not very likely to pay it. So the first part of the answer to your question is we try to take that into account with our assumptions for collection rate by customer class. So an owner-occupied residential property is very, very likely to pay this bill. At the other end of the spectrum, an abandoned commercial property might be very unlikely to pay the bill. And if it's old industrial land that might be contaminated, the threat of condemnation might not compel the payer to ever pay you the stormwater bill. So you're not going to collect on all this. And that takes me to the final edge of it, which is we haven't stipulated a proposal on whether you would attach a lien to a property for non-payment of the drainage fee and then force collection at property transfer. We haven't gotten to that point. And when we do get to that point, we're going to rely very heavily on the attorneys. We're not attorneys, and it's not our expertise, but we can help model it however they advise.
Yeah, that is what I was kind of trying to figure out, because I think once you start having on the books a whole bunch of debt owed to the utility itself for non-payment of a new fee, how do we showcase that? How does that look when it comes to our bond rating and everything like that, associated with it? So I just wanted to see how we're going to kind of, once we put something in place, how do you show this out, this debt, and this probably for you, Greg. So how does that look on our books after we do that? And then, would there be that lien to properties and things like that? So I just think that's something we need to also add into what this looks like, for our future. So
I wanted to quickly just jump into and say, I think this is partially why I was thinking a lot about not charging undeveloped properties, because I can imagine a situation where we have it's pretty common in New Orleans that there are often churches or nonprofit community development organizations that have purchased individual single-family homes or lots in neighborhoods that they serve, and they hold this property for a long time. In many cases, they've become sort of nuisances. If, for instance, these nonprofits or churches become defunct, they've got, these properties that start to become nuisances within the neighborhood. I'm sure many of them are doing great work, but I know that there are a few cases that have become more public in recent years where this has become a problem. And I just wonder if we're not charging for undeveloped land, this may incentivize these exempt owners to demolish properties so that they can avoid paying anything. So if they currently own, say, 100 residential lots that have blighted houses on them, and they're getting, you know, sort of blight or code enforcement liens put on them, but because they're exempt property owners, they can just sort of let those ride for as long as possible. But suddenly we impose a stormwater fee, they start having to pay a fee every year. That would really incentivize them to demolish those houses and have a vacant piece of land, because they would no longer have to pay the stormwater fee. And so I know that there has been some conversation about sort of using this fee as a way of incentivizing those types of owners to either dispose of or develop their property. But I worry that if undeveloped land is not chargeable, that actually incentivizes them to do nothing with it, or it actually incentivizes them to do sort of worse with it.
I agree. So what are your thoughts on, or what has been your experience with other areas with that type of situation that Director Antrup was talking about?
The general situation is that in most places, the drainage fee is not a large enough number to cause significant change in the economic choices made by individual property owners. That it's completely true that preserving a piece of land in its undeveloped state would save someone money under this rate structure. But usually the things that are there to be gained or lost by their choice of what to do with the land are significantly bigger numbers than the drainage fee part. And I think there's kind of two ways to look at it in New Orleans. One is your rates are going to be a lot higher than average because you need a whole lot more money than average. And on the other hand, more than half of your revenue is being generated by the millages. And in this rate proposal, that continues to be true for the whole rest of my life. So, and so you've already got this case where someone can save money by not developing their land because the appraised value of their land ties directly to their millages, whether it's the 14.26 for drainage or the 3.18 for streets. So I think in general, for most properties, there will be a more compelling reason for what they choose to do than the impact on their wallet from the drainage fees applicability. But it's not to say it's nothing, it's just to say it's really hard to do much about it.
Yeah. To say what you're trying to say simply, if it costs $10,000 to tear the house down, but the stormwater fee is $150 a year, the return on investment to tear it down doesn't make sense.
Yeah, now, as you get to the extremes where you're looking at things that don't cost much money and have a lot of impervious area,
Yeah.
or cost a whole lot of money and don't have much impervious area, that's the full continuum, right?
Yeah.
And at the margin, there's always going to be some of that.
Yeah.
I don't have anything else.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Keith and Nora. I think this has been a really helpful presentation. I think the work has continued to advance. It's like I said before, I think we're probably the closest we've ever been to seeing this thing through, which is really encouraging to me. I guess before we move on, I'd wonder if the staff have any, remarks about the importance of this or sort of the consequence of not receiving this sort of steady revenue source or not. You don't have to.
Well, I would say, and we've said it for a while with the board, it's imperative that we have the funding needed to maintain our drainage system. I believe we only have about $9 million at this time, which is grossly below what we need. I know I recently saw articles in the newspaper, they talked about neighbors cleaning out their catch basins. We're doing all that we can. And as a result, we have to have a teamwork attitude working with the community, and their assistance is appreciated. But we don't have a system, and we don't have the funding for a system that allows us to do all things in all places with drainage. I think this would be a great positive step going forward. We're happy to collaborate with the city to see this be a success.
Thank you. Gray, not to put you on the spot, but I'm curious if you could just opine a little on, people talk about how we should be issuing bonds to do projects in the drainage system. Obviously, you and I know that's not possible, but maybe if you could talk a little bit about why that is, and what impact this type of proposal may have on our ability to do that.
Yeah, I think this brings the flexibility for actual financial planning versus just a bunch of piecemeal investments. The 3 millages that are on the books, one went away 1992. I've been told, people been here historically, you just add something when some bad event happens, it comes on, it rolls off, the millage rolls off in 2027, another one in 2031, 2046. So this is not the way to operate such an important utility. So the tax bonds do allow bonding only for the extent of the life of the millages. So that's not possible with one expiring next year, another one in another 4 or 5 years. We were able to do a bonding that helped get the power complex 4 years ago. Very appreciative of that. It was a short-term financing, but without the consistent revenue, you don't have bonding. So this will be a great step forward and put the next generation in place to have a funded system.
Yeah, I think it's really critical, how you said that it's not possible to do proactive, strategic investments in the system without a reliable, dedicated, long-term funding source.
Right.
And I think a proactive, strategic investment in the system is what the community has been asking us for, and it's what the community deserves.
Right. Agreed.
I have a quick question. What is the ability of the utility itself to create incentives? I did see in this particular presentation talking about a participation credit, education credit. I think the other one was like a volunteer credit. What is the capability of the utility to ensure that we are incentivizing people to do things dealing with drainage? Are we able to support something where we're incentivizing things with drainage or cleaning out the catch basins with a credit of some sort? Yeah.
Didn't mean to cut you
No,
off, but
no.
I would say that those are things that we can look at. I know, when I was general counsel in St. Louis and DC Water, we brought about this type of stormwater fee, and we had changing the impervious to pervious, and you could get a credit. You could get a credit if you did things to address the issue. If you used rain barrels, if you had a green roof, if you were able to get the pervious sidewalk or pavers for your parking lot. So all of those are things that you would able to get some type of credit for. And so I see Ralph Telliser keeps shaking his head, so I'm sure these are things that we could very well look at to enhance the program. But I think it is positive to give credits when people take the right steps to improve their property, because what that will do is put it in a better position for their children and grandchildren going forward.
I think that's an exciting way to incentivize people to actually take some power into, controlling what's going on their land, but also being a part of it by making sure that they have certain credits to their bills, because everybody wants to reduce their bills. So to incentivize it and become a portion, I think that's exciting if we're able to roll something out like that.
One thing too, I'd add, when they changed the sidewalk, let's say make it pervious or pervious pavers, rain gardens, they had a flyover every year. And when they went over, they would videotape or take a picture of what the land looked like. And then they would use that to determine how much pervious property they had. And so there's a way to monitor it and then to go ahead and give some type of credit. Keith, if you want to talk about what you've seen in other cities, that would be fine. If not, that's fine.
Well, I don't know how much I can add, Mr. Heyman, other than to say, that fellow knows what he's talking about when it comes to drainage. That the idea is these folks are doing something that reduces their demand for service. They are reducing their demand for service through their actions. And so just go back and think about water again. If I went and put a new toilet in that was a low water use toilet, I will automatically get a benefit on my water bill without having to talk to y'all at all, right? So the way this is different is if I do something to mitigate my drainage demand, we need a program for that because it won't automatically propagate to my wallet because we can't meter the service like we can for water. So not only can we do it, we need to do it. It's the only fair thing to do. And there's a lot of homegrown efforts in your city where people are doing what they can because the Sewage and Water Board can't do everything. It doesn't have enough money. So I think it's particularly important in New Orleans to do it and do it well.
I do think it's important to note, though, that it requires a fee regime like this to be able to do that, because under the current tax-based system, because of the prohibition on, donation of public funds, we cannot offer any kind of program like that, So I think initially your question was sort of, if someone's out there cleaning their catch basins, can we offer them something today? And I think, please step in if the lawyers in the room, we've got plenty of them, that's not possible. We can't, we can't do that under the current system, but with a fee, you can, because there is this nexus between, you're paying for the runoff. If you're not, contributing any more of that runoff, then we can offer you that fee as an offset. But under the millage system, we can't do that. So that's an advantage of moving to fee revenue. Well, Raftelis, thank you so much for your work. We hope to continue to see the fruits of your labor pay off over time. And we'll look forward to continuing to hear from you over the coming months and years.
Thank you all very much for the chance to present today.
It's our pleasure. Do we have any public comments?
No public comments, Chair.
All right. Well, I did want to take just a quick minute before we go towards adjournment to just say it has been the absolute honor of my lifetime to work with the folks here at the Sewage and Water Board. I think I've had the opportunity in my career, been very lucky to be able to make connections and relationships with people at utilities all around the world. And what I've found is that the people who work here every day at the Sewage and Water Board are just as talented and just as dedicated to their mission, and in fact do it in much more difficult conditions than most people in other places. And so I hope that as the work that is currently happening to provide for a better governance model for this utility happens, that the employees of this incredible utility are kept in mind, are engaged, and are held up as the model that they are. So yeah, it's been great to be here, and I look forward to continuing to watch what you all accomplish.
Well, I want to say on behalf of SWPNOR and staff, thank you. Thank you for your dedication, thank you for your focus, and thank you for your input. You have made a difference on this for this organization, and we're very appreciative.
Thank you. If there's no other matters, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Well, there's no motion.
You don't have to, since it's just the two of us. All right, well, then we'll call it. Thank you all.
Thank you.